Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perik Yud, Mishnah Yudalid. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, Neriyahu ben Burcha Yisraelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. The Mishnah cites three more cases in which an activity is permitted only in the Bet HaMikdash, in the temple. Kohen Shelaka Betzba'o, Korech Alav Gemi BaMikdash. A Kohen who has a wound on his finger may wrap a reed around it in the temple, Avaloba Medina, but not in the rest of the country. And the commentaries explain it is rabbinically forbidden to wrap a reed around the wound on Shabbat because the reed helps to heal the wound, and healing procedures are rabbinically forbidden because the rabbis were concerned that people might crush herbs to make medicines on Shabbat, which is biblically forbidden as a toradah, as an offspring of the melacha of grinding. Therefore, they decreed that one may not treat minor aches and pains on Shabbat. Nevertheless, if a Kohen serving in the temple has an unsightly wound on his hand, he may cover it with the reed. Now, this is considered a temple-related need, the Rab explains, because it is improper for a wound to be seen on a Kohen when he is performing a service in the temple. Now, he should therefore cover it with something such as a reed. Now, although nothing may be between a Kohen's hand and the vessel he is holding, like we learned earlier in the Mishnayot, that law does not apply here because our Mishnah refers to a reed placed where it does not constitute a chatzitza, a separation. For example, on the Kohen's left hand or on the back of his right hand. The Mishnah continues, Im leotzi dam kan v'chan asur, but if he ties the reed tightly around the wound in order to draw blood from it, the act is forbidden both here in the temple and here outside the temple, because drawing blood violates a biblical prohibition, which is forbidden even in the temple. Drawing blood is a toradah of slaughtering, like we learned in Masechet Mishnayot Shabbat, chapter 14, Mishnah 1, and like we said, that would be forbidden even in the temple. The Mishnah now quotes the second case, Bozkin melach al gabe kevesh bishvil shelo yachaliku. We may crush salt and scatter it on the ramp leading to the altar so that the Kohanim do not slip as they walk up and down the ramp. Now, the commentaries explain in the Arts Crusaded notes that if clumps of salt had already been crushed and then the salt stuck together again, one may crush the new clumps. However, crushing clumps of salt for the first time violates the melacha of grinding and is forbidden even in the temple. So the Mishnah is referring to a case according to the Gaon Yaakov where the clumps of salt have already been crushed, and they stuck together again. You can crush the new clumps. Now, although this is rabbinically forbidden because it resembles the melacha of building, it is permitted in the temple. Now, spreading salt on a surface resembles an act of building because it improves the surface by making it less slippery. But again, like we said, it is permitted in the temple. The third case involves drawing water from a well with a bucket that is raised and lowered by means of a wheel. We may draw water with a bucket tied to a wheel from the exile's well and the great well, which were located on the temple premises on Shabbat. Now, this too is rabbinically forbidden, yet permitted in the temple. And the commentators explained the rabbis were concerned that since it is easy to draw water from a well by means of a wheel, one might draw water to water his garden, which is forbidden under the melacha of planting. Now, the prohibition applies only to wells that are near a garden or some other area that is irrigated. But like we said, it is permitted in the temple. The Mishnah continues, and we may draw water with a bucket tied to a wheel from the well of the source. It was called, the Rav says, the well of the source, because being fed by a spring, it was the source from which people accessed the spring's water. Again, we may draw water with a bucket tied to a wheel from the well of the source on Yom Tov, even though that well is not in the temple. And the Rav explains when those who lived in the diaspora outside of Israel traveled to Yerushalayim for Yom Tov and they needed to drink water from this particular well, the prophets among them allowed them to do so using a wheel. Once they allowed it, it remained permissible to draw water from this well on Yom Tov using a wheel, even though the well was not in the temple. And this permission applied only to that well, the Rav says, and not to any others. And that is the end of Mishnah Yudalid. We continue now with the final Mishnah in Masechet Eruvin, Mishnah Tet Vav. The Mishnah cites one more rabbinically forbidden activity that is permitted in the temple. It concerns a sheretz, any one of the 8 species of creeping animals listed in Sefer Vayikra chapter 11, Psukim 29 and 30, whose carcasses are tameh and transmit tumah to people or objects with which they come into contact. If a dead sheretz, one of the 8 species of creeping animals is found in the temple, it must be removed, because nothing tameh may be brought into the temple or allowed to remain there. Now, a tameh person is biblically forbidden to enter the temple, and if he does, he must be sent out, as the Torah writes in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 5, pasuk 2. Similarly, a dead sheretz and other tameh items may not be brought into the temple, and once it is there, it must be removed, as the Gemara teaches us. The Mishnah discusses how a dead sheretz should be removed from the temple on Shabbat. Sheretz shenimtza b'mikdash kohen motzio behemyano. If a dead sheretz is found in the temple, a kohen may remove it with his belt on Shabbat, even though it is muktzeh and may not be moved in any place outside the temple. Shelo l'shayot et hatumah, so as not to keep the tumah in the temple longer than necessary. We want to remove the tumah as quickly as possible. Since it is obligatory to remove a tameh object from the temple, the sheretz must be taken out immediately. A kohen is therefore obligated to pick it up right away with his belt, even though the belt will become tameh. Now, the commentaries explain the kohen may not leave the sheretz in place until he obtains wooden tongs, which cannot become tameh, and pick up the sheretz with the tongs. Since it is forbidden to leave a dead sheretz in the temple, he should rather pick it up with his belt, which he can do immediately, then go and find wooden tongs, which will take some time. Now, normally it is prohibited to make a kohen's belt tameh, because as one of the kohanic garments, it is sacred, and causing a sacred object to become tameh is forbidden. And by making the belt tameh, he brings new tumah into the temple. Now, in this case, however, where the sheretz must be removed as quickly as possible, it is better to make the belt tameh than to wait until wooden tongs are obtained. And nevertheless, the kohen may not touch the sheretz with his hands, because the kohen himself would therefore become tameh, and this is worse than contaminating the belt, because one who makes himself tameh in the temple is punished with karet chas v'shalom, as is the person who enters the temple when he is tameh, while making a sacred object tameh in the temple is not punished with karet. Now, the Rav says when the kohen carries the sheretz with his belt, the kohen himself does not become tameh, because the sheretz transmits tumah only to a person or object that touches it, and not to a person who carries it. Nor does the kohen become tameh by touching the belt, because the belt is not a primary source of tumah. It became tameh merely through contact with the sheretz, and as a rule, only a primary source of tumah can contaminate people. Divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. These are the words of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Rabbi Yehuda says, bitzvat shel etz. He disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. He says he should pick up the sheretz with wooden tongs, which cannot become tameh, and not with his belt. Now, the Mishnah, the Rav says, refers to tongs that consist simply of 2 wooden blocks that are flat and do not have any cavity. Wooden utensils in which there is no cavity, what we call pishutei chli etz, they cannot become tameh. Therefore, by using such tongs to pick up the sheretz, the kohen accomplishes the task without making anything tameh. The Mishnah says, Shelo lerabot et tumah. The reason that Rabbi Yehuda says this is so as not to increase tumah in the temple. Now, although it may take some time to find wooden tongs, and in the meantime, the sheretz will remain in the temple, this is preferable to picking it up with his belt and increasing the tumah in the temple, even for just a short time. Now, the Maharsha explains this dispute applies on a weekday as well. It's only mentioned in the context of Shabbat to teach that the muktzah prohibition of Shabbat is waived for the sake of removing the sheretz. And the Rav does tell us, Rabbi Yehuda, the Halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, as we mentioned earlier, it is permitted to remove the sheretz even though it is muktzeh, because the rabbinic prohibition of muktzeh is not applied in this situation. However, the Mishnah now cites a Tana who holds that the muktzeh prohibition is waived only if the sheretz is found in the most sacred parts of the temple. Me'echad motzin oto, from where in the temple may we remove it despite it being muktzeh? Mina echal umina ulam umibena ulam belamizbeach. We may remove it from the sanctuary. Now, the sanctuary included the Holy of Holies, where the ark was located, and the Holy, where the menorah, table, and golden altar were located, what we call Kodesh or Kodesh HaKodashim. The Kodesh HaKodashim had the Aron, the ark, and the Kodesh had the menorah, the Shulchan, and the Mizbech HaZahav. So, Mina Echad, we may remove it from the sanctuary, Mina Ulam, from the antechamber. Now, the antechamber was a large hall at the east of the sanctuary that led from the courtyard into the sanctuary, Umi Ben Ulam, and from the section of the courtyard between the antechamber, and the altar. Now the sanctuary and the antechamber were located on the west side of the courtyard. The altar stood in the courtyard to the east of the antechamber. The area between the antechamber and the altar possessed more sanctity than the rest of the courtyard. Whoever can see the diagram brought down and the arts elucidated in our Mishnah can visualize what we were referring to. Now, V'lamizbeach, and the altar. So again, Mina Echal, we may remove it from the sanctuary, Mina Ulam, from the antechamber, Ben Ulam, and from the section of the courtyard between the antechamber, V'lamizbeach, and the altar. Now, these are the most sacred parts of the temple. You can remove them from these, but not from a place of lesser sanctity. Divrei Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. These are the words of Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas holds that although the Torah requires that a sheretz be removed from the temple, the obligation to remove it immediately is not so strong that it overrides other prohibitions, and this includes the rabbinic prohibition of muktzah. Therefore, if a sheretz is found in the temple on Shabbat, it must be left there until after Shabbat. However, if it is found in the most sacred areas, we said the temple building and the part of the courtyard between the temple building and the altar, it should be removed immediately, since these areas are closer to the Shekhinah, to the divine presence, as Rashi explains on his commentary, Masechet Eruvin, page 104b and 105a. Again, just to read the line again, Mina Echal, from the sanctuary, Mina Ulam, from the antechamber, Umi Ben Ulam Mizbeach, and from the section of the courtyard between the antechamber and the altar. These are the most sacred parts of the temple. From there you can remove the sheretz, but not from a place of lesser sanctity, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Anas. Rabbi Akiva Omer, however, Rabbi Akiva says, Makom shechayevin al zdono karet val shgarto chatat misham motzin oto. We remove it from any place that a tameh person is liable to karet for entering on purpose, and is obligated to bring a chatat for entering inadvertently. Bishogeg. Now the Torah forbids a tameh person to enter the sanctuary, antechamber, or any other part of the courtyard. If he does so with the knowledge that he is sinning, what we call b'mezid, he receives karet. If he does so unaware that he is sinning, what we call shogeg, he must bring a chatat offering. Now these places include the sanctuary, the antechamber, and the entire courtyard, even beyond the altar. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva says if a dead sheretz is found anywhere in the courtyard on Shabbat, it must be removed, and only if it is found outside the courtyard should it be left in place until after Shabbat. And the Rav does tell us, V'alachak Rabbi Akiva, the Halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnah now teaches what should be done if a dead sheretz is found on Shabbat in a place in which it may not be removed, meaning beyond the altar, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, or outside the courtyard, according to Rabbi Akiva. Ushar kol hamikomot, and if a sheretz is found in any other place in the temple on Shabbat, kofin alav b'sachter, we cover it with a pot and leave it until after Shabbat. The Mishnah concludes with the statement that refers back to Mishnah 13, which taught that if a string of a musical instrument used in the temple broke on Shabbat, its ends may be tied together with a temporary knot. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, even though his opinion is not mentioned there, and forbids even a temporary knot because it might lead to making a permanent knot, which is biblically prohibited. Now, Rabbi Shimon permits the string to be tied only with the bow, which is a knot that can be undone by pulling just one string, as the Rav says. Now, although in that case, Rabbi Shimon took a strict position, in chapter 4, Mishnah 11, he ruled leniently. The Tana Kam of chapter 4, Mishnah 11 stated that if when Shabbat begins, a person is just one amah outside the line that marks the tchum of a town, he may not walk more than 2,000 amot from his current place. Rabbi Shimon, though, said that provided he is within 15 amot of the line, he may walk anywhere within the tchum of the town. And Rabbi Shimon proceeds here to explain why he ruled strictly in one case and leniently in the other. Rabbi Shimon says, Makom shitiru lecha chachamim mishelecha natnu lecha. In the place where you are allowed to walk, meaning anywhere within the tchum of the town, they are merely giving you what is yours. And the commentaries explain what does that mean. Even if a person is 15 amot outside the boundary when Shabbat begins, he may go anywhere within the town's tchum, because the markers for a town's tchum are usually placed 15 amot closer to the town than the true boundary. As Rabbi Shimon himself explained in chapter 4, Mishnah 11, now this was done as a safeguard to prevent people from mistakenly straying outside the tchum. Now therefore, although he is 15 amot beyond the markers, he is still within the tchum. That ruling, therefore, is not some special leniency. It simply reflects the reality of the situation. Now, this case is not comparable to that of the broken string, where it's appropriate to rule stringently, because the rabbis allowed you to do in the temple only that which is a rabbinic decree, and not that which is biblically forbidden. Therefore, it is forbidden to tie the broken string of a musical instrument, even in the temple, because some knots are biblically prohibited. Meaning, the Rav explains, Rabbi Shimon permits tying the strings with a bow because all kinds of bows, whether temporary or permanent, are forbidden only according to rabbinic law midrabanan. Rabbi Shimon does not permit using a regular knot, even if it's temporary, because some regular knots, those that are designed to last a long time, are biblically prohibited. Now, our Mishnah's concluding statement in the name of Rabbi Shimon actually belongs at the end of Mishnah 13, which discusses tying the broken string. The Tosfot Yom Tov writes that the reason the Tana chose to complete the list of activities that the rabbis permitted only in the temple, the Tosfot Yom Tov explains that Tana chose to complete the list of activities that the rabbis permitted only in the temple before discussing the view of Rabbi Shimon. That way it's like keeping it in a Seder. First we discuss all the activities the rabbis permitted, then we bring the dissenting view of Rabbi Shimon, who disagreed, even though rightfully it should have belonged at the end of Mishnah 13. That's how the Tosfot Yom Tov explains why the Tana continued to the end of the activities and only brought the dissenting view here. And the Rav does tell us, Ven halacha ki Rabbi Shimon, the halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. That is in Rabotai of Mishnayot Mesechet Eruvin, Slika la Mesechet Eruvin. Chazak u'baruch Rabotai, Mazal Tov on the accomplishment. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.